So review. So on module one, on our introduction, we covered, to be an effective educator, there are five main areas you need to think about and consider. Knowledge of yourself, knowledge of your trainees, knowledge of the system, knowledge of the curriculum, and knowledge of andragogy. And an effective teacher not only spends time teaching, but also spends time reflecting and making sure that they are teaching in the appropriate way that they should be teaching. So we covered that on module one. Then on module two, we talked about really the focus was learning theories and different learning theories. We talked about three domains of learning: cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. And as an educator, when you prepare your instructional methodology, you have to use different skills to address different types of learning that your students need. So cognitive is kind of makes sense for us. It's really knowledge acquisition, intellectual skills, and so forth. The second one, which is more important for anesthesia and surgical subspecialties, is psychomotor skills. So when you think about your curriculum, you have to ensure that you address, how you're going to teach manual skills, thinking about physical actions and so forth. And then the third, which is important for our subspecialty, is affective domains of learning, which is people's attitude. So that's important in our field because you're interacting with patients, you are interacting with surgeons in the operating room, in the operating room team, patient families, and so forth. So really in ensuring that you have instructional methodology to address affective domains of learning are important. Again, in module two, we said that there are many different learning theories. We talked about just two of them. One of them was Kolb's learning theory, and that is really focuses on experiential learning cycle. So effective learning is seen when a person progresses through a cycle of 4 stages. First one being having a concrete experience, which is followed by observation of and reflection on that experience, which leads to the formation of abstract concepts and analysis and generalizations. And then that leads to testing a hypothesis in future situations, which results in a new experience. And Kolb says people learn effectively when they go through these cycles. Then we talked about Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's created a taxonomy for us that could be used as a common language around teaching and learning goals. When you think about a range of educational approaches, you need to use different kinds to achieve different levels of thinking for your students. So aligning your learning objectives, learning activities, and learning assessments based on what level of thinking you want to achieve for your students. Then we touched a little bit on learning styles. And we also said there are many different theories on learning styles, and people have spent a lot of time to learn about those. We chose the VARC, which stood for visual, auditory, reading and writing, or kinesthetics. And we talked about each of these and how, people learn best for these different learning styles. Then an important part that we talked about is really you don't want to match learning styles to an individual or to a student, but really matching learning styles to the content that you're covering. So if you're covering anatomy, maybe you might want to use visual. If you're trying to teach intubation, maybe you want to think about kinesthetics and ways of using kinesthetic learning styles. Then we shifted gears on module 4, talking about the first of 3 instructional methodologies that we're going to cover through this course. And this one was focused on PowerPoint presentation and how you'd make your PowerPoint presentation better. So we had a lecture on quality presentation. So we said a quality presentation starts with knowing your audience, making sure that you create a roadmap so your learners will know where you are in the middle of the talk or how you're going to present the information. We said that it's very important from the outset to express what your objectives are for the talk. We said it would be very helpful to activate prior knowledge so that your learners can put what the new information you're going to give them in context. We said it's important to revisit your roadmap throughout your talk to help guide your learners and help them stay on track. And then we said it is important to restate your goals and objectives at the end of the talk so that people can evaluate and see if you covered what you were hoping to cover. And then more specifically about PowerPoint slides, we said, 5 rules for a quality PowerPoint design. Rule number 1, one message per slide. Rule number 2, no sentences. Rule number 3, 6 objects maximum per slide. Rule number 4, using images, how that really helps get concepts across for your audience. Then rule number 5, use animation when it's appropriate. And then we mentioned 4 delivery tips. One was knowing your slides. The second is make sure you are presenting the information, that you are engaged, you're engaging with the audience, and that it's not your slides that are doing the talking, that your slides are tools to get the information across. And then the third is, we said, be sensitive to timing, time yourself, practice, and make sure you leave time for questions at the end. And then the fourth was, it's very important to seek feedback, present your talk in front of somebody else, one of your mentors, to get feedback to make sure that it's good quality. And then on modules 3, Marie Martin talked about course goals and course objectives. She gave us clear definition of what we mean by course goals versus what we mean by course objectives. So course goal is a statement that describes in broad terms what the learner will gain from the instruction. Really, she spent time talking about backward design, beginning with the end in mind. So identifying what your desired results are, and then determine how you're going to evaluate to make sure that you have addressed those goals. And then knowing how you're going to measure that, then going into planning your learning experiences and instruction. So make sure that you align your course components based on your goals, and that you want to consider what your students, what you want your students to encounter, to master, and to retain. When it came to course objectives, what a course objective is the specific and measurable terms that describe what the learner will know or will be able to do as a result of the instruction. So she taught us that objectives need to be learner-centered and not teacher-centered. It's not an objective for you. It's what are my objectives for my students to achieve. That it needs to include action, verb, and content, and the context. And then you drive your content, your instructional strategies, and evaluations based on what your course objectives are. And then she gave us a couple of tools to use when we think about course objectives. One of them was SMART, standing for your objectives need to be specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. And then another tool was the ABCD tool. And then she also said, make sure that you think about Bloom's taxonomy and what level of learning you want to achieve as you create your course objectives. Then on module 5, she focused that on assessment review. And it's important to know the difference between assessment and evaluation. So assessment is the systematic collection of information about a student's learning. And you use background design to plan assessment strategies. Whereas evaluation is the process of making a judgment about the meaning of the information that you've collected. So she helped us define steps of assessment. So making sure that your assessments are aligned with learning objectives, making sure that they're rigorous, making sure that they're authentic, making sure that they're transparent, and making sure that they're actionable. And when you think of assessment in your backward design, it's the second step. So the first step was identifying your desired results. So the second step is where assessment comes, where you determine what is an acceptable evidence to ensure that you have your identified results, and whatever you plan in your learning experience will fit into the whole picture. And a couple of things that she wants us to think about is for an evaluation to be effective, it has to be very clear, it has to be well communicated, and it has to be clearly understood by students. So how do we achieve that? And she said one good tool to do that was using a rubric. Why do we use rubrics? She said it provides a transparent communication of what criteria you're using to evaluate the students. It helps set goals for students, and sometimes that serves to motivate students. And then because it's detailed and because it's transparent, it likely is more valid and it becomes more reliable. And then she said it helps clearly distinguish between a good work and a great work. So it helps you create gradation of, when someone is doing okay versus when someone is doing excellent. And then she also said another benefit of rubrics is it reduces students' anxiety. And how does it do that? It's because it makes it clear to them how you as an educator will evaluate their work. And then she also taught about typical assessment tools, diagnostic versus formative versus summative. So definition, what do we mean by formative is what the students are learning. So formative assessment looks at how students are learning. It's a process which is planned in advance. And it tells us how the students are learning and if we need to make adjustments as we're doing some teaching. Whereas summative assessment looks at how students have mastered the learning objectives at the end of instruction and to see if students are ready to progress to the next level. So what are some of the tools that we use? So for diagnostic, or what do they know before you start a course? Using screening, pre-test diagnostics, using inventories, observations, asking questions. Then for formative, we use things like quizzes, checklists, and questionnaires, or self or peer evaluation. And then for summative, you're used to those written tests, exams, portfolio review, and so forth. And as a group, you'll have this exercise of planning a session plan, which hopefully will help you bring all the things that you've learned together. And then lastly, on module 6, it was focused more on time management. This time management piece fits in a bigger picture of when we're thinking about a strategic plan for how to become a great leader. So when people coach leaders, there are 5 things that they want them to focus on. One is developing a vision. The second one is cultivating a plan. The third is a focus on achieving what you have planned. The fourth is seeking guidance and counsel from your mentors or from your colleagues. And then the fifth and more very important part is reassessing your progress periodically. So, where does time management fall? Time management falls under how you focus and cultivate your plan and how you focus on achieving those plans that you have. So, when Elizabeth was teaching this, she said, make sure that you remember that time is your scarcest resource. So it's important to manage your time. Instead of, she said, um, don't let time manage you. She said, manage your time. In order to do that, she said it's important to create a list of tasks that you need to do. And then she said, prioritize your tasks. There are many ways to prioritize. One way is, having an urgent and an important, non-urgent and non-important, and divide your tasks in that way, and then make sure that you focus and spend your time and energy on the column that focuses on the urgent and important portions. And then she said, finally, schedule time to complete those tasks. Scheduling your priorities increases the likelihood that they will be done. All right, I'm going to take a big breath. So I'm just putting this slide up there to remind you that you're creating a tool belt. So all the different things that we have taught you, we're hoping that from each of these sessions, you are putting in things that you will use as an educator in the future as you're advancing as an educator. So I will stop right there and see if you guys have any comments or questions, or if you found this helpful or not.